was the Queen for a very long time. And although you kind of know that this might happen, you don't really think about it very much. Not least of all because the monarchy is about continuity.
For years, Princess Anne carried a secret that could alter how Britain understood the final wishes of both her parents. Then, without warning, she finally spoke. Her revelation was not a vague memory or a passing family remark. It was a promise Queen Elizabeth made directly to Prince Philip, a promise concerning Camilla, the future of the crown, and a boundary the late monarch believed must never be crossed. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Anne had always been the family's disciplined keeper of private loyalties. She rarely defended herself, rarely explained her choices, and never repeated words spoken by her parents behind closed doors. That restraint mattered, because the monarchy had changed around her. Camilla's household had gained access to ceremonies, private properties, royal patronages, and decisions once guarded by the Queen's closest circle. A royal patronage is an official connection between a royal figure and a charity, and those appointments can shape influence and power. The tension broke during a private family meeting recorded in Anne's documented account. She entered carrying a slim leather folder that had belonged to Prince Philip, then placed it before Charles. The king watched her hand leave the cover and knew that his sister had not come to discuss routine palace business. She had brought something their father had deliberately preserved for a reason. Camilla did not rise. She stiffened when Anne said their mother had anticipated this exact moment, and the queen consort's silence carried more fear than protest. Charles looked from his wife to his sister, torn between shielding the woman beside him and hearing the truth his parents had left behind. Anne opened the folder and removed a handwritten record of a private exchange between Elizabeth and Philip. Then she stated the promise plainly. The Queen had told her husband that Camilla could stand beside Charles as his wife, but she must never use that position to control the crown or advance her own family into royal power. The crown meant the authority of the monarchy, not merely a jewel or title. Philip had written the words down because he believed the boundary might one day be tested. Anne refused to explain the cause immediately. She told Charles the vow had not come from jealousy, resentment, or the memory of Diana. It followed one specific incident that convinced both Elizabeth and Philip that a permanent royal safeguard was necessary. But before Anne could explain what had frightened their parents so deeply, the people gathered around that table were forced to confront what each of them stood to lose. The revelation did not strike every person in the room the same way. For Charles, it threatened the legitimacy of choices he had defended for decades. For Camilla, it exposed a ceiling she believed had disappeared with the Queen's death. And for Anne, it reopened the deepest wound of her life, the burden of protecting two parents whose final concerns had been left in her hands. Charles reached for the handwritten page, but read only the opening lines. Then he set it down without speaking. His fingers remained pressed against the paper, as though releasing it would mean accepting that his parents had doubted the future he had fought to create. Camilla had not simply become his wife. She had become the person he trusted through humiliation, public anger, and years of resistance. Securing her place beside him had felt like the final victory of a relationship once treated as a national disgrace. Camilla watched his face change and understood the danger immediately. The Queen Consort, the title given to the wife of a reigning king, had believed the old limits disappeared when Elizabeth died. Now Anne was telling her that one boundary had been designed to outlive the monarch herself. She felt judged by two people who could no longer answer her, and that anger quickly mixed with fear. Anne was not questioning her marriage. She was defining where her authority must end. Anne held her ground because Prince Philip had trusted her with truths others found too painful to hear. Their bond had never depended on softness or constant agreement. He relied on his daughter because she could face an uncomfortable duty without turning away, even when it wounded the people closest to her. A private safeguard, meaning a hidden rule created to protect royal authority, had already been disclosed to William, though not in its exact wording. Charles looked up sharply when his son's name entered the conversation. William had resisted several proposals involving Camilla's relatives, private access, and future palace roles. Until that moment, the king had treated those objections as caution from an overprotective heir. Now he understood that the prince had known some restriction existed and had been guarding a boundary he could not fully explain. Camilla asked whether the promise had been created to shame her. Anne answered without hesitation. It had been created to protect Charles from confusing personal loyalty with constitutional responsibility, the duty of a monarch to place the crown above private relationships. She repeated that her mother had accepted Camilla beside him. What Elizabeth feared was influence spreading beyond that marriage. Then Anne delivered the most painful truth. Philip had not merely asked the Queen for reassurance. He had demanded the promise after witnessing a moment that convinced him the direct royal line could one day be weakened from inside. And the moment that triggered Philip's fear had begun not with a grand betrayal, but with one quiet request inside Windsor Castle. Long before crowns, titles, and public acceptance transformed Camilla's position, there was a private meeting at Windsor that almost disappeared from royal memory. No cameras recorded it, no formal announcement followed. Yet one request made during that conversation unsettled Prince Philip so deeply that he sought out the Queen before the night was over. Years later, Anne would identify that meeting as the point of no return, the instant a family concern became a royal safeguard. Charles had been pressing for clearer recognition of Camilla's future for years. He wanted her treated not as a tolerated presence, but as the woman who would one day stand beside him. He also wanted her personal household drawn more closely into royal life, because he believed trusted people around her would strengthen them both. That mattered, because every new privilege made her position feel more secure, but it also pushed private loyalty closer to public power. Elizabeth understood the pain behind her son's requests. The Queen was willing to offer Camilla dignity, protection, and public respect. Yet she remained careful about the sovereign's institution, the official system of authority, property, staff, and duties surrounding the monarch. She feared that once private relatives entered that structure, personal affection could begin shaping decisions meant to serve the crown. Camilla raised the issue during a private Windsor meeting, preserved later in Philip's written account. She asked whether one of her adult children might eventually receive a formal advisory position connected to royal charitable estates. Such estates are properties and funds used to support causes under royal oversight. She argued that a trusted family member could protect Charles from courtiers whose loyalty might disappear when pressure grew. Philip did not interrupt her. He slowly removed his glasses, placed them on the table, and asked one question in a voice that carried more force than anger. Was the monarchy now expected to become responsible for the ambitions of every family that married into it? Charles immediately defended Camilla, insisting the request concerned trust, not privilege. She withdrew it, but the damage had already been done. Elizabeth found her husband later that evening, and he told her exactly what frightened him. Camilla's request had revealed how affection for Charles might open institutional doors that blood, service, and constitutional duty had kept closed. Constitutional duty meant the obligation to protect the monarchy above personal relationships. Philip feared that once one exception was granted, others would follow. The Queen gave him the promise that Anne would later preserve. Camilla could be honored as Charles's wife, but she would never redirect crown authority toward her own family or dominate decisions belonging to the sovereign's direct heirs. Philip then asked his daughter to remember the vow because he believed Charles might one day be forced to choose between love and duty. That feared choice had now arrived, and when Charles finally lifted his eyes from the page, brother and sister were no longer discussing history, they were confronting each other over the crown's future. Charles had spent much of his life waiting for the freedom to shape the monarchy in his own image. Now, seated across from the sister who had known him longest, he was being told that his parents had placed a limit on that freedom before he ever became king. The confrontation that followed was not simply about Camilla. It was about whether love could overrule a promise made in the name of duty. Charles rose first. He told Anne that the monarchy had changed, and so had the woman she was judging. Camilla had survived years of public hostility, fulfilled royal duties, and remained beside him through illness, grief, and accession. Accession means the moment a new monarch formally comes to the throne, and for the king, that transition had been made bearable because she had stood with him when the weight became almost impossible to carry. Anne stood as well. She refused to let his anger push her back into silence. She accepted Camilla's service and did not deny the suffering she had endured, but she insisted the promise was never about respect. It concerned the separation between a consort's personal influence and sovereign authority, the power legally and symbolically held by the monarch and passed through the direct royal line. Camilla looked at Anne and asked whether she had ever understood what it cost to enter the family. The queen consort spoke of humiliation, suspicion, and the years spent knowing that every smile would be examined for ambition. Anne listened without interruption. Then she answered quietly that suffering did not grant ownership, and sacrifice did not erase boundaries. Charles stepped closer to his sister and accused her of using their dead parents to challenge his judgment. Anne did not flinch. She told him she had remained silent for years because she wanted to protect him, not weaken him. But that silence had become impossible once he began preparing to approve a permanent palace advisory role for one of Camilla's relatives. The room changed at once. A palace advisory role meant a formal position with access to private planning discussions, royal property decisions, and information normally reserved for trusted members of the sovereign's household. Charles had believed the appointment would strengthen loyalty around him. Anne saw something else. She saw the exact door Philip had feared would one day be opened. Camilla turned toward Charles, realizing that the revelation had not come from old resentment. Anne had spoken because the private concern raised at Windsor was about to become reality. The king's anger weakened as the truth settled in. His sister had not returned to the past for vengeance. She had acted because the future had begun repeating it. Anne then reached into Philip's folder and removed a second document. She slid it across the table without another word. The page carried the Queen's signature and a clear instruction showing that responsibility for enforcing the promise had been placed in more than one pair of hands. Charles had believed his sister was standing alone, but the second document revealed that the late Queen had built a barrier strong enough to survive even the will of a reigning king. The monarchy rarely protects itself through dramatic declarations. Its strongest defenses are often buried in private instructions, divided responsibilities, and promises entrusted to people who understand when silence must end. Queen Elizabeth had known that affection might weaken judgment. Prince Philip had known that guilt could make Charles vulnerable. Together, they created a safeguard that did not humiliate Camilla, but ensured that no consort could quietly reshape the crown around a private family. Anne kept her voice steady as she explained what the signed instruction actually covered. It did not control Charles's marriage, his affection, or the public dignity granted to Camilla. It focused on appointments, access, private estates, symbolic inheritances, and roles capable of influencing the next generation. A sovereign household is the official network of staff, advisors, properties, and duties serving the monarch, and the Queen had drawn a firm line around who could gain permanent authority within it. The document named Anne as the family witness. It also identified William as the direct heir whose consent would be required before any non-royal relative could enter that structure with lasting power. The direct heir means the person first in line to inherit the throne. Elizabeth had not placed the burden on one person because she understood how easily family pressure could isolate even the strongest royal. William received Anne's message while reviewing papers alone. He read the summary twice, closed the folder before him, and remained still. The prince understood that enforcing the safeguard could force him into open disagreement with his father. He also understood why silence was no longer possible. Once private relatives gained access to royal decisions, reversing that influence would become far harder than preventing it. Charles felt the walls closing around him. The king saw the arrangement as proof that his parents trusted his heart, but feared what he might do when loyalty to Camilla became involved. That judgment cut deeply, because he had spent years believing his devotion showed courage. Now the same devotion was being treated as a possible weakness. Anne then revealed the detail that changed the meaning of the entire document. Elizabeth had deliberately avoided naming Camilla's children. The rule applied to every consort's family, present and future, which meant it could not be dismissed as a private punishment. It was a permanent defense against personal influence, entering royal authority through marriage. Camilla understood the danger at once. The proposed advisory appointment could not legally or morally proceed without William's approval. Anne already knew what his answer would be, but Charles had not yet heard it from his son. The decision was moving beyond old grievances and into the hands of the future king. When William finally entered the room, he carried no file and offered no speech, only a decision that changed Camilla's place inside the palace overnight. The fallout began with a sentence so calm that its force took several seconds to register. William did not accuse Camilla of plotting against the monarchy. He did not question her title, her marriage, or her years of service. He simply refused to approve the appointment. In that instant, the promise made between Elizabeth and Philip ceased to be a memory. It became an active limit on the power surrounding the throne. William spoke carefully, because he understood the difference between rejecting a person and rejecting a boundary being crossed. Camilla would continue to receive the dignity, protection, and public standing attached to her position. Her children and private relatives, however, would not gain institutional authority simply because she was married to the king. Institutional authority meant an official role with access to decisions, staff, properties, and influence belonging to the monarchy itself. Charles heard the refusal as both a judgment and a warning. The prince reminded him that this was not a vote on his wife's worth. It was a distinction between family intimacy and crown responsibility, the duty to protect royal authority even when doing so caused private pain. The king knew the argument was sound, yet that truth did nothing to soften the humiliation of being overruled by his own son. Camilla removed a ring from her finger and turned it slowly on the table. Then she asked Charles whether he had known his parents believed she might become a danger to his judgment. The queen consort did not raise her voice. She did not need to. Her question carried every insult, every rejection, and every old fear she thought she had survived. Charles searched for an answer but found none. His silence wounded her more deeply than Anne's words, because it confirmed that some part of him understood why the promise had been made. Camilla looked away first. The victory she once believed complete now felt conditional, and the acceptance she had fought to secure suddenly seemed surrounded by invisible limits. William gave the next instruction without anger. Palace staff were told to cancel the advisory appointment, review private access arrangements, and separate Camilla's family engagements from official royal decision-making. Official royal decision-making meant the private process through which the monarch and senior household figures manage duties, properties, and future plans. The consequences spread quickly. Several ceremonial privileges recently discussed for her relatives were withdrawn, including preferred places at private royal gatherings and expanded access to estate events. Charles understood that the refusal was no longer confined to one appointment. The boundary was being enforced across the household. Camilla did not seek him out that evening. Instead, Anne found her alone, carrying the weight of a decision that had changed everything between them. With the palace machinery already moving against her request, Camilla faced the one person she believed had judged her most harshly and heard something she had never expected from Anne. There were no aides in the room, no private secretaries waiting beyond the door, and no king present to defend either woman. Anne and Camilla sat opposite each other, with only the queen's promise between them. For the first time, the conflict was stripped of titles and palace authority. One woman carried the burden of her parents' final boundary. The other carried decades of rejection, and the fear that acceptance had never truly been complete. Anne spoke first. She told Camilla that Elizabeth's promise had never been designed to deny her love, respect, or a place beside Charles. The queen had understood how deeply her son depended on the woman he trusted, and she had accepted that reality before much of the country did. A private secretary is a senior aide who manages a royal figure's official work, but none had been allowed into this conversation. The truth had become too personal for palace machinery. Camilla listened without interrupting. Then she admitted what fear had done to her. Years of being treated as an intruder had left her determined to build protection around herself and her family. What others called ambition had partly grown from the terror of being pushed aside again. She had fought so long for security that she had stopped seeing how easily protection could begin to look like control. Camilla finally asked the question she had carried for years. Had Philip ever forgiven her? Anne paused because she knew a careless answer would wound more than it healed. She said her father had stopped judging the past, but he had never stopped guarding the institution from anyone's personal needs, including those of his own family. The institution meant the permanent system of duty, authority, and service surrounding the crown. Anne then admitted her own pain. Revealing the promise through her documented family account had felt like betraying her mother's privacy. She had guarded Elizabeth's words for years, but silence had become another form of betrayal once the very danger her parents feared began to appear. Camilla saw then that Anne had not spoken to defeat her. She had spoken because duty had left her no gentler choice. The meaning of the boundary changed in that moment. Camilla understood that it protected her as well. Without it, every honor given to her relatives could be treated as evidence that she had captured the monarchy for personal gain. The limit denied her influence, but it also denied her enemies the proof they had always wanted. Camilla told Anne she would withdraw every remaining request involving her children. She would also support William's authority over future royal appointments. A royal appointment is an official position carrying access, responsibility, or influence within the monarchy. Anne accepted the decision, but neither woman mistook it for peace. The final change would not come from another document or command, but from Camilla walking into the king's study and choosing the crown's boundary over her own wounded pride. By morning, the secret could no longer be contained within palace walls. News of Anne's revelation spread across Britain, transforming a private family confrontation into a national debate about loyalty, marriage, and royal power. Yet the public response was not divided simply between admiration and outrage. Many saw something more complicated: a late queen protecting the monarchy, a daughter honoring her parents, and a consort being asked to prove that service mattered more than influence. Palace officials moved quickly. They released a carefully worded statement confirming that appointments involving extended family would remain separate from official crown authority and would require consultation with the direct heir. Crown authority meant the formal power, access, and responsibility belonging to the monarchy rather than to the private relatives surrounding it. The statement mattered because it transformed a hidden family promise into a public standard that could shape every future reign. Broadcasters seized on the deeper conflict. They described the revelation as a defining test of whether a modern monarchy could separate private affection from public responsibility, without destroying the people caught between them. Anne was praised for protecting her parents' wishes, but Camilla's pain also became impossible to ignore. The country was no longer watching a simple struggle between right and wrong. It was watching duty collide with decades of emotional survival. Charles followed the morning coverage alone until Camilla entered his study. The king looked exhausted rather than angry, knowing the nation was examining a wound he had spent much of his life trying to close. She did not ask him to defend her. Instead, the queen consort told him she had withdrawn the proposal and accepted Elizabeth's boundary. Charles stared at her in disbelief. He understood at once what the decision had cost. Camilla was choosing to protect his reign, even though the promise had reopened every fear that she would never be fully accepted. The monarch reached for her hand, but neither of them pretended the pain had vanished. Then one image captured the public mood. A major London newspaper appeared with a stark front page showing Anne leaving Windsor beneath the headline, "The Promise She Kept." Outside Buckingham Palace, crowds gathered holding photographs of Elizabeth and Philip, turning a private vow into a symbol of continuity. A presenter reporting live from the palace called Anne's action the moment the late queen's private authority reached across time and restrained the living monarchy. Public opinion began shifting again when Camilla arrived beside Anne at a memorial service. Their composed appearance suggested not friendship, but resolution. The world had witnessed the shock, the resistance, and the surrender, but the true verdict would be measured by what each person chose to protect after the anger was gone. In the end, Princess Anne's revelation did not remove Camilla from the monarchy, weaken Charles's marriage, or divide the royal family beyond repair. It did something more lasting. It forced every person involved to decide where private devotion ended and public duty began. The promise Queen Elizabeth made to Prince Philip survived because it was not built on bitterness. It was built on the belief that the crown must never become an instrument for one family's emotional debts. Charles acted first. The king formally withdrew the proposed advisory role and signed a permanent household rule preventing relatives of any present or future consort from receiving crown authority without the direct heir's written approval. A household rule is an official instruction governing how the monarch's staff, access, appointments, and private duties must operate. His signature transformed Elizabeth's private promise into a lasting standard that would not depend on changing relationships or another daughter being forced to expose a family secret. Charles then asked Anne to meet him alone. He admitted that he had first heard her documented revelation as an attack on Camilla and a challenge to his judgment. The monarch now understood that their parents had been protecting more than the direct royal line. They had also been protecting his marriage from suspicion, because public trust could not survive if private love appeared to purchase official power. Anne listened quietly. She had not wanted victory over her brother, and she felt no satisfaction in watching him surrender. The princess had carried Philip's folder because her father trusted her to act when loyalty became dangerous silence. Now that duty was complete, but the cost remained. She returned the folder to the Royal Archive, the secure collection where important royal records are preserved. and rested her hand upon it before closing the box. Camilla made her own decision publicly. The queen consort supported the new rule and asked that no special position ever be created for her children. Her statement ended the suspicion that she intended to build a second center of influence around the throne. She had lost the authority she once sought, yet she gained something stronger, the chance to prove that her service was not a path toward family power. William thanked her in private. The prince did not speak as an heir correcting a consort, but as a son recognizing that restraint had required greater courage than resentment. She accepted his words because both of them understood what had finally changed. The verdict was clear. Anne's silence ended because duty demanded it. Camilla's ambition stopped because wisdom replaced fear. Charles's reign grew stronger because he accepted a boundary greater than his personal wishes. Elizabeth's promise to Philip had not condemned Camilla. It allowed her to prove that she could stand beside the crown without trying to possess it. And when Anne walked away from the archive, the promise was no longer a secret, carried by one daughter. It had become a settled principle of the monarchy, honored at last by every person it was created to protect. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.